Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and deliver the crucial insights you need. Today, we're plunging into a figure who has, well, captivated imaginations for centuries, Nostradamus. When that name comes up, most of us probably conjure images of a shadowy mystic, right? Scribbling cryptic warnings of doom and destruction, a perpetual source of wild speculation. But what if much of his enigmatic vision wasn't some inexplicable cosmic download, but rooted in something incredibly familiar, something, woven deeply into the fabric of Western civilization? Today, our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the profound and often overlooked connections Nostradamus had to the Bible. We're going to reveal how biblical imagery, powerful prophetic themes, and even his own explicit claims shaped his most famous predictions. We'll lay out the evidence, showing you how the celebrated and, yes, frequently sensationalized figure was profoundly influenced by ancient religious texts. Our sources really dig into his religious background and the very specific ways the Bible informed his work, inviting us to shift our perspective from, pure mystic to something much more grounded and historically situated.
It's a crucial shift in perspective, definitely, because to truly understand Nostradamus and the depth of his work, we must first appreciate the religious world he inhabited. The common perception often strips him of this fundamental context, but his deeply religious foundations are absolutely critical to interpreting his prophecies. Without that lens, you're missing half the story, really.
So, if we're going to challenge that common mystic image, where do our sources suggest we begin? What's the most surprising piece of information they reveal about his religious foundation? Maybe something people just don't know.
Well, what consistently emerges from these historical accounts is a foundational truth. His deeply religious personal history was not a peripheral detail, not at all. His family, for instance, was of Jewish origin, but they had converted to Catholicism. Now, this alone provides a crucial context for his worldview, suggesting a lineage steeped in religious tradition, but also one that experienced a significant shift in faith, carrying with it a blend of cultural and spiritual heritage. This wasn't just a superficial connection, it was a profound ancestral adherence that profoundly shaped his intellectual and spiritual landscape.
That's fascinating. So this wasn't just like a casual affiliation, something he picked up later in life. It was ingrained in his family history, a part of his heritage that clearly informed his own choices. And our sources point out he went further, making significant bequests to religious orders in his will. That's a powerful testament, isn't it?
It really is.
It suggests a genuine faith, maybe not purely performative, and active support for established religious institutions. It really sets the stage for how he might have approached something as profound as prophecy. It wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't merely background, it's foundational to his perceived prophetic authority. What's truly striking, I think, is that Nostradamus himself explicitly stated the divine origin of his visions, grounding them firmly in the very text we're discussing, the Bible.
Wow.
He didn't just feel inspired, he claimed a direct, undeniable line to divine revelation from a specific source.
This detail about his preface is particularly intriguing. It seems to cut through so much of the later mystique. What else do our sources tell us about these explicit claims? It seems like such a direct challenge to the popular image.
It absolutely is a direct challenge. In the preface to his incredibly famous True Centuries, which, for those unfamiliar, are the collections of his prophecies, usually written in those four-line poetic stanzas, the quatrains, Nostradamus explicitly stated that his visions came from the creator God of the Bible.
Not just God or the divine.
No, specifically the creator God of the Bible. He wasn't talking about some abstract cosmic force. He was talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This wasn't some vague spiritual feeling. It was a clear, unambiguous claim to a specific, well-defined source of inspiration.
So he wasn't just dabbling in religious texts. He was actively leveraging them, claiming direct divine inspiration from their ultimate source. But does this active reliance imply he was maybe more of an interpreter of existing prophecies rather than a receiver of entirely novel visions? Or is it more complicated?
That's an astute question, and the sources suggest it's probably a blend. He was certainly influenced by the broader intellectual and spiritual landscape of his time. I mean, that era was profoundly shaped by apocalyptic thought. Our research indicates he was deeply familiar with various end-of-the-world prophecies, and many of those were directly Bible-based.
Right. That makes sense for the time.
The apocalyptic tradition, rich with symbolism and warnings, was clearly a significant intellectual current for him and his contemporaries. Furthermore, he drew from collections like the Mirabilis Liber, the Book of Wonders.
Ah, yes, I've heard of that.
It was a hugely popular 16th century compendium of medieval prophecies from various authors, many of which were directly derived from or steeped in biblical narratives and imagery. So this wasn't just passive reading, it indicates his direct engagement with and reliance on these biblical and biblically based texts, almost like source material.
Like footnotes, almost.
Exactly. For understanding and framing his own visions, much like a scholar would cite references, he was actively studying and incorporating these ancient narratives into his work, using them as a framework for his own prophetic interpretations.
Okay, so establishing that direct claim to a biblical God and his engagement with existing prophetic texts, that's one thing. But for our deep dive, the real question becomes, did that influence manifest in the content of his prophecies? Did it actually shape the way he saw and described the future in his famous quatrains? Was it just like a prefatory nod, or did it permeate the very fabric of his predictions?
It raises a really important question, yeah. And the sources confirm that his deep familiarity with the Bible wasn't just theoretical, it profoundly permeated his prophetic language. Many of his prophecies include biblical metaphors and symbols, very specific ones, which makes them resonate with a specific religiously literate audience of his time and, well, indeed ours, if we know what to look for.
So when we read about mysterious beasts, or great upheavals, or, cataclysmic events in his quatrains, it might not just be poetic license or some random imagery plucked from the ether.
Exactly.
It could very well be a direct echo of powerful, established biblical imagery. It's almost like he was speaking in a known religious dialect.
Absolutely. A known dialect. That's a great way to put it. The sources specifically highlight that his prophecies incorporate biblical imagery and themes, particularly those found in the book of Revelation.
Ah, Revelation, okay.
And this is a significant point because Revelation is the primary source of apocalyptic prophecy within the Christian tradition. It's the text. It's a book full of highly symbolic language, dragons, beasts with multiple heads, angels, divine judgments, heavenly signs, earthly catastrophes, you name it. So when Nostradamus describes, for instance, great stars falling from the sky or a beast arising from the sea with 7 heads, you can almost hear the echoes of Revelation's dramatic visions.
Right. Those images are very specific.
They are. His consistent use of these symbols suggests a deliberate and deeply informed integration of biblical narratives into his own prophetic framework. He wasn't just inventing a new symbolic language. He was drawing from an incredibly rich and, importantly, well-understood existing one, leveraging symbols that carried immense weight and meaning for his audience.
That truly gives us a completely different lens through which to view his work, doesn't it? It grounds it in a historical and religious tradition rather than purely abstract mysticism. Perhaps even making his warnings more potent for his devout contemporaries. It suggests he was acting as a bridge, maybe, interpreting new viands through an ancient sacred vocabulary.
It does seem that way. But what's fascinating here, and adds another layer, is the complexity of his position. Despite his clear ties to Catholicism, his bequest to religious orders, his claims of divine inspiration from the biblical God, he wasn't universally embraced by the church. In fact, his path was fraught with some peril.
That's a true paradox, really. I mean, even with all these clear religious connections, his family's conversion, his claims of divine inspiration straight from the Bible, his generous contributions to religious orders, he still ran into trouble. That seems like a profound contradiction for someone seemingly so devout. What gives? What happened?
It truly does, and it speaks volumes about the incredibly complex religious landscape of the 16th century. It was a tense time. The sources indicate that Nostradamus, despite all his clear ties to established religion, was also accused of heresy.
Heresy? Wow.
Yeah, this underscores the very fine line he walked. In an era where interpretations of prophecy and divine communication were tightly controlled by the church, even someone deeply steeped in biblical tradition and claiming inspiration from the Creator God could find themselves scrutinized and potentially condemned. Our sources suggest that his independent claim to divine foresight, often conveyed in that ambiguous language outside of established church channels, was seen as deeply unsettling by some powerful figures.
So it wasn't necessarily about the content of his prophecies being anti-biblical, but maybe more about the method and the challenge to established authority. The idea that he was receiving direct revelation without the church's mediation.
Precisely. That seems to be the heart of it. His work, while drawing heavily from sacred texts, must have been unsettling to many. It hinted at revelations outside the official, controlled channels. The church held immense power over doctrine and spiritual interpretation, and an independent prophet, regardless of their claimed source, could easily be viewed as a threat to that authority.
Right. Control was key.
It reminds us that devotion doesn't always guarantee immunity from suspicion, especially when you're claiming independent access to divine foresight. That could be perceived as bypassing or even implicitly challenging the church's exclusive role, and his ambiguous language, while maybe intended to allow for multiple interpretations and, longevity.
Sure to keep them relevant.
It might also have fueled suspicion that he was dabbling in unauthorized or even dangerous spiritual practices.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? It means that understanding Nostradamus requires looking beyond the sensational headlines, beyond the tabloids and the doomsday cults that have often claimed his mantle. It means appreciating the rich, sometimes contradictory religious context that profoundly shaped his life and work. His prophecies aren't just random musings. They seem deeply rooted in a specific theological framework, one that was familiar and incredibly powerful in his time. Understanding this context unlocks a deeper, more nuanced appreciation of his enduring legacy. Today, we've taken a deep dive and seen how Nostradamus, far from being just a mysterious oracle conjuring visions from thin air, was deeply immersed in biblical tradition. We've traced it from his family's religious conversion from Judaism to Catholicism, which deeply colored his worldview, to his direct and explicit claims of divine inspiration from the creator God of the Bible, right there in the preface to his most famous work. We then looked at how this influence wasn't just theoretical, but manifested in the very language of his prophecies,
And the imagery.
particularly through the specific biblical imagery and themes, especially from the powerful and apocalyptic book of Revelation, woven throughout his quatrains. And we've explored the complex legacy he left a man of faith accused of heresy, highlighting the precarious position of an independent prophet in his time. His work, for all its mystery, simply can't be understood apart from these ancient sacred texts. So considering how deeply Nostradamus drew from biblical prophecy and explicitly claimed his visions came from the creator God of the Bible, how might understanding his foundational sources change our approach to interpreting his predictions? Does knowing this make us look for deliberate reinterpretations of ancient warnings, maybe? Or perhaps a reapplication of established biblical archetypes rather than purely independent foresight? It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what new insights we might gain by reading him as, well, perhaps a scholar of Scripture as much as a seer, something to think about.